And the thing is, you're right that it's split. That's two different books. This is the Empress's book and the Three Terrors, and then this is June and Kima touching their butts, and the other person also feeling that they're touching them, and then
It's just weirdly horny out of nowhere. Like the nipple play
so
stuff, like out of nowhere.
it's so weird.
It's wild because I think it would have been so much more affecting to just not have that kind, like to just be like, and then they realized if they touched each other they could and then just cut to the next scene.
How would you work in feet then, Maria? How would you work in a foot job in that case?
That happened is wild. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. Today, it's your host, Maria. Today, we are reading A Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This is one of those books we are in differing of opinions. Before we get into that, because once we open that can of worms, it's just gonna go. Like, I'm just letting you guys know, it's one of those episodes where, like, the can's gonna open, and then, like, we're not gonna be able to put it. If we get to the plot of this thing, I'm going to be impressed with us.
What plot?
It has a very straightforward plot.
Yes, it does.
I would argue that's one of the problems. It is too straightforward of a plot.
What is the premise of this book? Because that will actually help enlighten me as to what it is.
The premise of this book is a kind of myth-making and myth-telling. The idea of, I think at its core, partially like lineage and feeling identityless and finding identity in the myths of your ancestors. But the plot, because that's the overarching thing, but I think the plot premise is there is a kingdom. It is in, oh god, I lied. There is a theater where you get to go and you get to watch a story of the cultural history of your people. I say your people because chunks of this book are in second person, talking to a you in the audience of this theater I'm about to describe. We get glimpses of the you. But this inverted theater shows culturally important plays and dances for this nation of people who have now diasporaed all over the place. And in this inverted theater that we find ourselves is being told the story of the fall of the Old Kingdom and the Old Country, and how the Moon Tyrant is brought down, and you get, I don't know, there's mythology, there's characters, and you go on a journey, and as it's being cut through, the conceit of this book is you're kind of watching a play, and there are characters that are giving asides to the audience that are side characters. There's things that you're getting described, but mainly it functions as a kind of straightforward fantasy outside of these asides that happen. And it's these two main characters, a one-armed guy named Kima and a dude named June, and they're escorting the body of the Empress, who is also the moon / a goddess, to a place so she can kill off her sons and end the
reign that she enabled when she fulfilled a promise from somebody who was like, yo, you want to like chill with us? And she was like, yeah, I've been wanting that. And he's like, chill, like, can you pop out some sons so that way I can be like an epic ruler and they can be epic rulers? And she was like, bet.
And they became a tyrant, and now this is the fall of them.
And they are the Emperor at the beginning. She's called the Empress. She's an old lady now. The Emperor and her had 3 sons. They're called the Terrors, only one of which I remember the name of.
I was actually really confused by this. Wait, am I wrong in saying that there have been multiple emperors and that this emperor is... Do they all procreate with her?
They all provide her a bowl of their seed, of which she drinks and then produces babies. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not the first emperor that she was with.
No.
It's the 8th.
Yeah, this is 8th down the line of weird incestuousness.
I mean, she's not even a human, so it's like...
She's in a human body.
She's drinking the seed.
Your mother is the one who produces your sons. Like, at the end of the day, I call a spade a spade.
Okay, and so yes, there are the 3 terrors. They're going to be the 3 mini-bosses throughout the book. It's mostly about June and Kima going on this journey. And by mostly, I'm kind of lying, because this book is a lot of things. It keeps coming back to Kima and June on this journey, but also it does a ton of asides. Like Maria said, there's a whole thing where, like, you're talking, the narrator is talking to you, second person, who is in like a diaspora situation and now lives in like a not great area, a ghetto, as we might call it. And then also, a large chunk of this book is from the Empress's point of view. And then a large chunk of this book.
So the perspectives change a lot, which makes it very confusing because it goes from second to first to third, depending on what the story is trying to tell you. And the story at its heart has multiple themes, but I think its heart of hearts is storytelling. It is the art of storytelling. And while that might not always be clear in this book itself, which in and of itself is something to say about what does it mean to tell a good story, which we can all argue about later, the majority of the book, it's actually three main characters. And the Empress / the Moon gets her own little extra section where it gets first person, so it becomes a lot more personal. But we have the You, which is our main character in not Common Era, because we're not in Common Era, but in the most thing that we can recognizably say is Common Era. And then we have Kima and June. And throughout this whole thing, we have the You of the Common Era watching in the Dream Theater the story of Kima and June. And within that, we get so many other subplots of other people's stories, including something as small as a 5-second tribulation of a man being framed, and all of his like efforts in being something loyal only to have been framed and killed by the person he was loyal to.
Yeah.
So
The main conceit of the story is that you're watching a play of these events, but it's then just also in normal third person for a little bit.
I think one thing that Will was hitting on that I do agree with is the point of this story at its heart is supposed to be Kima and June and their relationship and their romance. And I do think, and again, I mainly enjoyed this book. I had some things I had problems with. I definitely think I think it's overly ambitious, and it doesn't always hit the mark. This author tried to do a thing, but for the most part, I enjoyed reading it. I wouldn't rank it in like a top 10 or anything, but this is one of the things where I think the author missed the mark. This book should have done one of two things, and it tried to do both. It either needed to be an epic, sprawling fantasy about the fall of a country, in which case we are just going through different characters that are interwoven and creating a web/mesh of the downfall of this, and we visit back onto certain characters. But the story tells you that it is actually about these two guys, and that while we have the fall of this country and this tyrannical rule happening, and like mass events, it is actually a love story. And I think this book fails as a love story. We don't spend enough time with Kima and June, who are the main characters. Like, it's when you read the leaf, which I did afterwards, it tells you that this is about two guys escorting a goddess, and I'm like,
which I think is a horrible summary.
That is
like
not how I would describe
the story.
That is not how I would describe it. But it also tries to tell you that this is actually a love story, and I think it failed. It failed if this was supposed to be a love story, we needed to spend way more time with those characters, and June should have been more interesting. The two characters with the least development are the two main characters.
I didn't read the leaflet or anything like that, but that is like a horrible explanation of what this story is. I feel like it's not in the story, within the story. Sure, I get the whole point that his Lola and like the whole argument of this is a story about blood and sacrifice versus this is a love story. Like, I get what that message is trying to say, and how perspectives are all influential upon the meaning of a story and all of that. But also, it's just like, that's not, I definitely, if I were to give my own summary of this, it would not be that it's a love story. I would say it's a story about stories.
I think that would be more valid.
Angry Otter said, I stand by my cake analogy, which they said he's trying to have his cake third person and eat it to first person, and also be the cake second person.
Oh, that's actually like, really fucking
it's funny.
Angry
the
Otter.
Way it's hysterical. When I read that, I was like,
that's pretty apt. No, I think that there's so many people being so weirdly harsh on this book. Like, I think it's unkind to say that and by unkind, I mean, I have a different philosophy apparently than Maria and Will, which is fine. That's, I guess, like, that's like the good thing about the podcast is that we all get to describe our own perspectives. Yay. But like, I just mean, like, I think it's unkind to say that they overreached, because if you never try to push the envelope on what art is, then how the fuck are you going to be a Picasso?
I didn't mean that unkindly. I meant it was very ambitious. This is a crazy, like, task
in general,
to take
it's just
upon.
a very ambitious. Yeah, it is. 100%.
But I don't necessarily know for a second book, because this is only the author's second book. I
thought you said it was a series for a second. I was
no. This is their second book they've ever written, or he's ever written. And I just think this, like, I don't necessarily know that everything landed and worked as well as it could have. And I also completely understand why for a lot of people this is infuriating. Then this is angry making. Like, Angry Otter didn't finish this. Literally, they raged quit at, I mean, what was it? Like 25%, 29% Angry Otter. Because it was just such a frustrating reading experience. And part of it is the conceit of the theater either lands for you, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, there's no redeeming this book. There's no way to come back from that.
Hardcore.
There is zero ability to go, oh wow, you know, if the conceit doesn't work, it is going to be a painful, aggravating, and miserable experience. Also, I just want to put it out there, the authors sometimes shoots themselves in the foot with some purple-ass prose. Sometimes he writes stuff and you're like, did you think about those words, buddy? Could you have written that in a slightly different way? That was a weird word choice. I don't think that's doing the thing you wish it was doing. At so many points, I was like, if you would have just worded that slightly differently, what you wanted to come would have come. But instead, I'm sitting here going, I don't think that was the connotation. I
have
wanting.
examples we're going to be going through.
Yeah.
So this was a book club pick, right? We have a book club. Our patrons get to pick different books in it. And so this is one that they all voted on, which has made me realize, like last time, that democracy is a highly flawed system that often gets you bad results. This is the fourth book of what I would call the prestige gay people books, which would be Song of Achilles,
Where's my
She
shotgun?
Who Became the Sun, Saint of Bright Doors, and now this one, which are like, oh, we're really trying to do something new with storytelling. We have very lyrical prose. Also, all the characters are gay for some reason. Like, and everybody is like filleting these books online, like just stripping the skin filleting. Okay, these books online, people love them. This book was not as painful as some of the others we've read. It really wasn't. It's not bad. I think the author is extremely talented. And also, I think the narrator is extremely talented, which helped this book out.
God.
There's one voice
Oh
who
my
does
god,
that. Like,
what an amazing audiobook narrator.
his voice for Lubu adds so, it's such a
I
good
know!
voice.
It's so good. And the
It is.
tortoises.
Okay, so it's the tortoises that do it for me. The how do you even giggle as you laugh like that? I don't even know how to do that.
But I agree with Will. Lubu was chilling because of that flat kind of like nasaled desk worker monotone. Oh
But
my
also
God.
sort of like whining a little
Yeah.
bit at the same
like
time. Yeah.
artful. Fucking artful.
Limerick says, I don't think it has anything to do with gayness. Just going to say it. No, it doesn't. But it is one of the correlating factors. They're all also mostly taking place in non-European settings. I also don't think that's the cause. It's just like one of the weird things that correlates them all. This book was not the most painful we've read. But if there's one thing I hate most in the world, it's pretension. It is an author thinking that what they're writing is so smart, and then a lot of people thinking what they wrote is so smart. And this book has that in legions. I could feel the back pain from the author as he was trying to type and fillet himself at the same time. There is a quality to this book of utter I said to to Lindbergh while I was complaining about this book that the author never met a paragraph he didn't love, and she said he's never met a paragraph he didn't want to fillet. And again, fellatio will come up quite a bit, I think, in this review because it is apt for how this book is written. Okay, so on to the problems. Theater conceit is stupid. The theater conceit is not really is not integrated into the story in a way that gets you dividends. Theater is a very different media form than novels. If you've ever read Shakespeare, you'll know this because seeing it performed is always better. Seeing it performed by high schoolers will always be better than reading it. Theater is, I've talked about this before, different media forms can tell the same story, but they have different strengths. Me and Katie went through a graphic novel called A Guest in the House, and we actually just broke down page by page how this goes in and The author is really able to make use of kind of the syncopated thoughts and the different page positions to really hit you with things that through prose you couldn't necessarily do. And choosing to describe a different media form through one media form and then a different one is a real weird decision, and I don't think gets you anything. So for example, in this book, people will just randomly will hear their thoughts. We talked about this before, but basically it's almost like Maria compared it to a Greek chorus, which would be cool, but a lot of times it's just random shit. And it's also just things that could be told you in other ways. You don't get any new insight into the world because of them. One of the things I talked to Maria about was in Shakespeare, he often does like really good monologues. And she said this is based more off of Asian theater, which doesn't do that as much. But that's an example of a thing he could have done that actually like, okay, maybe through a monologue, he could have built a theater feeling. Ultimately, what the theater stuff does is it really confused me because it's like you're doing something and then somebody's hitting you with an interjection from somebody else's thoughts. There's also 3 layers of this because it's not just the narrator saying what's happening. It's sometimes a person's thoughts will come at you, and then sometimes the narrator will switch to talking to this person in the modern world. The person in the modern world is I don't know why they exist. Like they have no arc. They're just like isn't living in a diaspora kind of shitty. And you're like, okay. And the book tries to tie in a lot of the things that happen with what happens to that person, but that person has no arc. They don't really we're not really connected to them. It's just a very kind of weird, almost backstory, but in the future telling of it. I don't understand why it's there. It just gets confusing. There's never really any points of There's one point of synchronicity where the 2 hit, where she's describing someone hitting a door, bam, 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 or he is, and the author says like, oh, it reminded you of the ticking timer that your grandmother loved. It was a little egg thing, and then he punches the door and the timer goes off. And like, oh, okay, that was like an impactful moment where those 2 things synchronized. But thematically, it doesn't do anything. It's just kind of like, why does this the egg timer will never come up again. It has nothing. She's not saying something about the mundaneness of hitting a door.
It does.
Like, it does
right before a tsunami hits.
But I meant thematically. Like, it doesn't mean anything. The other thing is, again, it's confusing. You're reading a story and then all of a sudden you're somewhere else and then maybe somebody's talking to you, but maybe they're not. And now you're maybe in the present and you're maybe not. The other big problem is this all distances you from the characters. The characters feel extremely remote, and the book will depend on the characters to deliver its thematic notes. And these characters are just extremely simple, and just the villains are mustache twirling. They're fun mustache twirling, but that's all they are.
I only found one of them mustache twirling. The other
There's
2,
no depth to them.
I think there's a lot of depth
massive
to the first terror.
Kima and June are also like just the same person, and the author makes this bizarre decision to make one of the characters' change of heart from one lifestyle to another be the result of brainwashing, and then never explores that and seems to want us to care about the stakes of them having this change of heart that wasn't their change of heart. And the other thing is this book is just too long. It's 17 hours. It's too long. It's way too long. There's a whole hour to 2 hour interlude near the end of the book where the author just wanted to write fic of his 2 characters. And also, this book ends with a foot job. So I'm going to complain more as we go, and I will have examples, but I think it's some counterpoints.
I made an argument that if the theater conceit doesn't work for you, this book is painful and almost non-redeemable in a lot of ways. The theater conceit worked for me and was my favorite part of this book. There's a lot of books, especially when they're trying to tell kind of big stories with like a large cast of characters, that I find very hard to follow in the beginning. Like I have to find the perfect speed so my brain follows without me getting distracted. And the way this was written, I found very easy to follow. I also found it like very visually. Now I have to say, I listened to the audiobook, and I'm not sure reading the actual book on its own this would have worked as well for me. The audiobook gives you performance. One of the biggest things that theater gives you versus any other a written medium, because theater is like half written, half not, because you have to write the script, is performance. The performance of. And I think if you take this book out of the audiobook narrator's hands, you lose the performance aspect. And so I actually don't think I would have enjoyed this as much just reading it, because for me and the theater conceit, it only works to have this story read to you, because the theater conceit is calling a lot of Asian theater that is primarily dance-based, where the characters aren't actually talking, and then a narrator is narrating what is happening to you. Like, you're getting the thoughts of the characters from a person sitting off in the wings. And I don't know exactly, I didn't have a chance before I finished this to look into Filipino theater, but I do know that it's quite dance-based. But looking into some other Asian theaters where it is people on a stage and then someone narrating what is happening from the side. And I don't think this works if it isn't read aloud. I think the theater conceit works significantly less. Now, I also can understand why listening to this does not work for a lot of people, because it can be confusing. It does take a minute to get used to it. I loved the asides. I loved the moments where a character that normally would be completely ignored turns to the audience and gives a piece of themselves. And for me, I found it just was really interesting. I enjoyed it, and I was never confused. And again, I completely understand why other people were confused and why it's really annoying to have these narrative injections. But I just enjoyed them. There was something about this book that just coalesced as far as the theater conceit itself. I liked the moment where you realized that the characters on stage, like the people dancing, were never actually talking. It was just being semi-narrated in the space, and that you did hear voices, but it wasn't most of the time the actors on the stage speaking. I don't know. The theater conceit worked for me. I can see why it doesn't work for other people, but it added a visual sense. I visualized this more so than a lot of other things, and I almost always kept the stage in the back of my mind. But again, that's a very personal experience. I can understand why for other people it doesn't work, but I found it very successful. And I actually wish there was more of the moments Will said, where the visual experience of watching it reminded you of the fact that it was on stage. There's a couple of points where it talks about like actors behind doing something to add a visual effect to the thing, and I wish that was brought in more, because I really liked those moments. And I think if you're going to do this, you need more of that to really hammer home the theater-esque aspect.
Do we want to just discuss them almost by topic? Just talk right now about the theater aspect of it before we get into like characters and stuff?
I think that would be the most organized way of discussing it. And I think fuck the plot. Like, we can just discuss it. I don't think this is one of those books where we can just talk about the plot and talk about the issues as they cropped up. It's because it's more thematically fueled or whatever, if that makes sense. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, okay. We can try to describe a little bit of the plot as we go, but I think this is going to be something where
more discussion based. But anyway, okay, so look, first and foremost, I think the character of you, the character that is the Araya's descendant, I think that is so important, it's not even funny. If other people go into this, and that's why the leaflet description shocked me when you just mentioned it earlier, thinking that Kima and June are the main characters, I think if the author believes that, then I think that he misunderstood his own product. It's because that is not what the story is. At the very beginning, the foreword is to himself. He said, "This one's for me." And so I feel like that's the thesis of this entire book, is this is for me. And so this is the story of him. Now, whether or not he is like the person in the novel, or it's a stand-in representation of himself, or it's a character that he wants to, I feel like I don't know anything about the author himself, but through the setup of the novel, feel that I'm supposed to assume that this is the empathy I'm supposed to feel for the author, and the massive weight of cultural heritage and the confusion of the modernization and the loss of that identity, and how it is magical and it is important and it does define you, but it also has nothing to do with your day-to-day life, and unfortunately it's a gimmick at the end of the day, and how emptying and depressing that is. And I unfortunately think that part, I think, is while there are many themes in this novel, I feel like that's what it's supposed to be telling me at the end of the day. And that the tale of Kima and June and the tale itself, while it's a fun Avatar The Last Airbender adventure, where there's a lot of heaviness to it, there's like, you know, an end-all be-all, there's some pretty big stakes and everything. There's also like, which I think ruined the novel, in my opinion. Or not ruin it, but like ruin it for me. I'll get to that in a second. But this weird shift in tone halfway through the novel that both made it better and worse in many ways. I don't think that the author focuses enough on what I feel like the point of the novel is. And of course, that's me, the reader, interpreting it. It's for himself. Maybe he's very happy with the way it came out. I highly doubt it. No artist is ever pleased with their product. But unless you're, I don't know, I can't assume ACOTAR lady likes her shit, but I don't know. I feel like she's not happy with her product.
Oh no,
anyway.
I feel like she loves her product, especially when you learn the conceit. Her latest book series is a multiverse connecting all Throne of Glass and ACOTAR to Crescent City.
You're right.
Like,
you know what? I'm sorry. I forgot.
This bitch
I forgot about Throne of Glass.
Her, yeah. And again, she's making a multiverse, Katie.
Okay, wait, let's not get distracted, because that's a whole tangent I could just like eat up. But anyway, so anyway, that being said, I thought the first half, or the first, not quite half, it's almost like the first 2/3 of the novel is a completely different no, I guess the first half. Everything up until the main section of first person of the moon goddess's perspective is one novel. That is a whole other novel. The feeling of it was very formal. The theatrical, like the nature of the theater and everything felt very specific. Like, as in, like, there were very specific lines that didn't get crossed in the narration as far as how much we knew about characters and everything. And it very much did feel like a story I was watching on a stage, because I didn't get the inner thoughts of the characters as you might get from a novel. I got it in a theatrical display, such as the asides, which I also very much love. However, I think they are incredibly overused once Kima and June become sub-gods or gods or whatever. Once that happens, I think the novel falls apart once it goes to first person, mainly, unfortunately. Now, while I will say I think the most character development happens there, well, I don't know, that's debatable, I guess. But I guess what I should say is I became more emotionally involved with the characters, Kima, June, and so on, once first person became. So that became more traditionally fun to read, but it was a completely different novel. And the tone shifted from this formal, more classic literature sense that I got from that. When it switched to the moon goddess's first person perspective, it switched to this weirdly intimate, very modern feeling. The goddess lady, like, there were parts that felt very much like she was this ancient being, but there are also so many parts that made her feel, and I think it was done on purpose, but I don't know how I feel about it, made her feel real. And I didn't like that. She wasn't supposed to be real for me, but at the same time I loved it because it made me cry when she died, and it made me care about her and like all that stuff. But from then on out, it changes. And while I think it's a very shocking, fun twist in the change of the pace of the novel, it also makes it very, like, shallow. And I feel like it loses itself. It's because then the you of the first, of the modern era becomes it's either has to be you, about you, or it has to be about Kima and June. And it's like in the middle of the novel, the author decided, you know what? I care about the foot job in the end. We need to build our way up to that.
Yeah. No, there's 100%. The last third of the novel becomes the Kima June show, and I'm like, that's not what we had from the first half. I think one of the worst things that happened was the moon dying.
Yes, and I cannot fully describe how emotionally impactful her first person narrative was to me. I wish it was its own thing almost, and I loved how fun it, like, I liked the way it was told. I liked her being in the bear body. I liked all of that. But while I liked it, it didn't fit with what was just previously being told to me. And I think in that shift in the middle there is where whatever themes might have been like the egg timer and the you of the modern era and all of that, while all of that might have come to fruition to mean something really, really poignant, and even though it was still messy there, I think it was completely swept away by what the author decided to write. Like I think Will said, or somebody said, a fan fiction of itself. It felt very much like that, like two completely different books. And anyway, that is in gist my feeling.
Connecting this back to the theater aspect, the chapter from the Moon Goddess's perspective, which is the only chapter solidly told in first person, was the monologue of this story. It is her on stage by her lonesome telling you the story of the last day of her life, and with it getting the context of why she fell, because she was a moon, she was in the sky, she fell out of the sky and was like, I'm gonna be human now, and getting the context of why the fuck did you do that, like what brought you to this. And I really enjoyed that chapter, but I think it went on too long. I think it should have been a shorter, more succinct version of itself, and then switching back to other points of views as had been done. I really enjoyed that chapter, and I found the problem that I think Katie is talking about and Will talks about is once the Moon Goddess dies, and then unfortunately the tortoise, who I will describe at a later point, dies, you're just left with June and Kima, who, because this book did not fully develop them prior to this point as characters to follow and care about, you feel very disconnected, because you learn the most about these two characters in this last third, and I'm like, I should not have been getting these details about their, like, Kima and June and the way they think and all of that in the last third. It's one of those things where that needed to be, like, spread throughout. We needed, if that was going to be
convoluted on that, Maria. It's because, like, there's a certain magic to the theater scene where they wake up and all of a sudden it's first person and the you in the audience is like, what? That's his voice. That's Kima's voice. And that was very magical. But at the same time,
I like that. I don't like the stuff around it. I did not like I don't mind them. I actually like that, because I thought for a long portion of this book, are we ever going to do anything in the story with the concept of this theater where it is like people from different time periods, different parts of life from all over the world coming to this theater to witness this thing? Is it ever going to connect to the actual story? And it did, and I was quite happy with the way it did. I'm sure Will was not.
I think it made sense. It's because from the beginning I was like, oh, so once Araya was introduced in the spear, I was like, oh, so these are all Araya's descendants.
For me, the problem is the stuff surrounding it should have been spread out more. If June and Kima were going to be the people we're supposed to be rooting hard for at the end, there needed to be more of them, and we needed to get more develop of them. This book has that problem where side characters oftentimes are more interesting than the main characters, and we've talked about it before. Will has brought it up with the Locked Tomb series, how often the character you're from the viewpoint of is less interesting than the characters around them, and this book shouldn't suffer from that, because it isn't first person from certain characters, but it's like the one the book decided were the main characters just got the least amount of, like, development. If it was going to do that, I needed more of them from earlier in the book, and I needed, also, if it was going to be a romance, it needed to be more compelling sooner in the story. Or it needed to be the kind of romance where the romance begins at the end. Like we don't get anything, but then they go off, and you, like, thus began the romance. Like, those are the two routes you can take. You either commit, or you leave the romance as a future thing and just let the reader know, and then. But again, I liked the conceit of the theater, connecting back to what we were talking about, and I liked the way in which it worked. I do think once they eat the Moon Goddess and they have the things, the asides are too much. I also just don't like that as a concept. I think it, like, cheapens some stuff that happens, and I'll make an argument when we talk about that, about how she could have, or he could have used this better. But yeah, again, like I said, if the theater doesn't work for you and is an annoying trapping, this book is just not gonna work.
Okay, so we're gonna have to come back to how vapid the characters are, because we're supposed to be talking about the theater conceit right now. Okay, here's the thing. And Angry Otter said this earlier. The problem with the introductions is that they're just telling you how to feel. They're literally the author going, hey, feel this way about this person who's passing by in the thing. They're never like second order thoughts. The only time I really thought it added anything was when the Emperor crushed that guy into a cube of flesh. I was like, oh, okay, this would not have been as affecting.
Can we just say those moments of body horror, which are incredibly rare in this novel, are horrifying, though?
No.
I think
Maria
they're
said she
horrifying.
found this book so creepy, and I was like, no, sorry.
There was multiple points where I was like, ew.
Everything's too distant. Talking about the theater conceit again, the chorus is not used in a way where it's sparing or it's interesting or like it tells you something about the people of the land as you're going. It's all very surface level. This is how you should feel about this person, and this is how you should feel because they're only on screen for half a second. The other problem is that they don't really reveal any particular depth to the culture because there really isn't any. They don't think any differently than us. It's mostly just like, oh, okay, there's an evil empire. Cool. Let's go back to the theater. Okay, so I think that what you lose by making it a theater is distance and or closeness with the characters and clarity. Again, one of the reasons the part with the Empress is so good is because it's just her telling you shit. There's a lot less like bullshit going on in terms of the you target and then also all everybody else's character thoughts, and you're just like left with like, oh, this is the narrative, this is interesting. What do you think, Maria, the author gains by making it a theater? Because I've seen this a lot. A lot of people love this book and they never seem to really be able to specify why besides vibes. So what, in terms of like dividends, what does he get by making this a theater play versus telling this like the way Grace of Kings was told?
For me, it adds a kind of richness to the telling of it. Like there, again, I was always conscious of it being told as a theater play, getting to the point of realizing that, the words aren't being spoken by the dancers themselves. It's coming from a general sense of understanding. And I think for me, what it does is the idea that theater, especially the type of theater it is trying to display, is deeply culturally significant. And that the only way for this character to connect with their culture and the story of what they are is through this very culturally specific experience and telling. It is not just words being told. It is a visual medium that is ingrained. One of the things you learn about this through the story is how important dance is, and how dance was very important, was lost a bit, and then becomes a big cultural marker at the end. And so having it told from the idea of a dance theater, I think connects to what the author is trying to say about the cultural importance of feeling connected to your heritage. There was a term Katie mentioned to me about with Filipino writing. What was it, Katie?
I was comparing it to Sukiyan, which is another novel, and it's different. But wait, I'm not unless you're referencing something else. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, then it's fine. And how it it adds a richness to it. When I saw the characters moving and enacting things, it always held a dance-like quality to me throughout the experience of it. Reading it felt very different than reading a standard told tale. When the characters stopped and turned to the audience and spoke, it was as if like lights go down, spotlight on this one character, and I'm getting an insight into them and their like tiny story within the greater story. So visually it added a lot in a mental way to it, and it often for me added tension in moments where this thing is happening and then a character is terrified and the narrator is like whispering into the mic the fears of these side people, and how in a lot of cultural stories you get the larger context of like the people in power but not the like small folk, as it were. And so yeah, it on a reading level just felt very, I don't know, like jewel toned, like the experience of the visual added to how I pictured everything. The idea of dancing and the dance-like movements throughout the whole thing. And So yeah, and I don't know if that answers your question in a concrete way.
I mean, it kind of does, because you basically are saying you pictured it a lot like a play, which I
Yes.
find interesting, because like it's not described like a play. Like it's not described as like the lanterns fluttered in the wind mimicking, or like you could hear the crackle of thunder by somebody moving a sheet of whatever.
Yeah.
Like there's a few like that every once in
Yeah,
a while.
there should have been more. I absolutely agree. A lot of this was my mind taking the conceit and then extrapolating, which I'm not like. I agree that the author should have ground us in the play much more than it did. Descriptions. One of the things we talked about in The Witcher was how the way Geralt fights felt dance-like, and that was an active thing that the author was trying to bring into the text. And I felt like more descriptions like that throughout the more standard retelling of the tales that we got would have been really useful to connect that. And
That all exists in the novel, but unfortunately it's flooded out by the unnecessary fleshy pieces that take away from it.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about that, because I mean, I just did not pick up any feeling of dance-like quality from anywhere in the book besides him saying, hey, this is a dance-like quality. But also connecting to what Katie was saying and then what you said also, I don't think this is a story about diaspora, because so much of the book is not about that. And the impact you would have on the character isn't the you character isn't there. The you character does not go through an arc. They want to live. Like it's not like at the end of the book they suddenly have like different feelings about it. They were already connected to their culture through their Lola, telling these stories in a non-play format. We don't learn that this like dance thing is even culturally a big deal till very late in the book, and even then it's not really shown in the modern world at all. It feels very much like a thing that was like I understand it a little bit as a reading, but I don't think it's really backed up by the text or built by the text. Again, the you character doesn't change, and that's kind of the problem. He doesn't really have a conflict or a change, and it's like there is no real connection between, like at the end of the story, we don't even really get him. He just kind of wants to know if they banged or not. Like that's literally his most movement. I think also, if it's a story about diaspora, the you part is about 3% of this book, and about 97% of it is about these two dudes.
when I said it was about diaspora, I didn't mean the book itself. I meant like as a theme of someone, because like the author is, as the you is, half Filipino. It is the author's attempt to connect to a mythology that he feels separated by the fact, and I will agree with you. So I'm gonna say this before I finish my point. The you character needed to have a greater, and because it's mentioned in a couple of throwaway lines, and one of the things I complained about to Will with Dune is you can't just say something like one or two times and be like, well, it's in the text, and then get like a pass. The reader has to really walk away from it. And one of the things that this character struggles with is the fact that their mother's side of the family is not Filipino, and that they feel separated and not truly connected to their culture. And to the stories. Like, they have them, but they don't feel connected to them. And I think to give Will what he would have wanted and what the story should have had is the arc of this entire story is the character walking away going, I am the thing. It does not matter that I am half. I am connected. This is my heritage. This is my story. And then walking away from it that way. And unfortunately, that's not the arc we get. We don't get a character who like has all this information but doesn't feel personally connected to it and feels like a imposter amongst the theater. Because like that would have been great. That, like, how amazing if the entire time the you had been anxious about the fact that, like, what if they know that I'm only half? Like what if is the thing? Because a huge thing that
it's not mentioned until very late in the book, I don't think.
It's mentioned once earlier as a throwaway line, and then again mentioned once as a throwaway line in the end. I'm pretty sure it's only twice. And
It is.
That is such a criminal thing, because that is at the heart. One of the things, I took a really fantastic class in my master's program about Asian American writers, and a huge thing was their struggle with identity, and are they American? Are they Vietnamese, Thai, Japanese? Like, how are they connecting to this thing, and like they can be neither one, but at the same time they're this separate thing, and the feeling of disconnection, and that would have been such an fantastic thing to explore, because I think this book is the author's attempt to connect himself to that culture. And that's why I'm so disappointed that the you did not reflect that. And that's what he thinks, I think what he means when he said, this is for me. This is him attempting to write a cultural heritage that funnels down to him. And unfortunately, because we don't feel that moment of the you going, ah, yes, this, regardless of everything else in my modern life, this is my legacy. This is a legacy I carry. Like, I would have loved a scene where he, like, the you, like, gets up post dream and despite not knowing why, goes and stares at the spear on the wall, and for the first time in their life feels a sense of pride, and they're not sure why. Like, perhaps it was just a really restive night, you know? And the idea of this fading thing, but it being there in their core, like, and that would have really helped, because that's what this book is trying to do. It just fails in the delivery. Learning about the way in which the spear, because basically there's a spear and it comes down to the
Cuts
U's
the
family.
water.
Yeah, it cuts the water. But it comes down to the you of the story. Like, they have it in their family. I say they because we don't know the gender of the main character. A lot, you can assume it's he, but we're not told, so I'm just going to say they. And we see how it, like, in the end, gets through all these people, and how this relic of an ancient thing they still connected with. And it would have been fantastic to show a disconnect with this at the start, and then a connecting with it at the end. I think that would have been a really simple arc that would have worked with what was there. Like, it doesn't take a lot. You keep most of what's there. You just add this, and I think it would have just really brought together.
I agree that that would have been really beautiful, and I think maybe that's what the author was trying to do, but it's almost not in the story at all.
I would agree.
You said he wrote it for himself. Well, I would have liked it if he had kept it for himself then, because that he is not the only intended reader. There's other intended readers. Again, the you part is maybe 3% of this story, and it doesn't, the whole point of a character arc is to show themes and to examine how they can change, and you start in one place and end in another place. And that's just, again, I did not know that they were of a different really culture until like real late in the story, when he mentions being ashamed that his grandma, and then making fun of his grandma's accent, and I was like, okay, cool. And so, and that the thing is, then the emotional beats of the story to work depend on the characters in the story, and I think this kind of connects back to what we were talking about in terms of Kima and June being such weak characters, because the pivotal moments of this story at the end depend on them and their decisions, but like they're just not in the story for a lot of it, and then when they are, we don't learn a lot about them. They like gay wrestle like 3 times, but you don't really get a sense for who they are. We learn a secret about Kima that completely recontextualizes his character, but like then we just don't know who he is. Like, there's a real problem where we spend so little time with them that when we do spend time with them, we're not interested in them, and we're not really given any reason to. The author doesn't really have a deft hand with character in terms of like, oh, these people were on screen for like 5 minutes, but this is, but like you still like them, like, like a Tamsin Muir can do that, where like a character shows up and you're like, oh, they kind of jumped off the page. There was another book we read recently that wasn't very good, but could do that well. I don't remember which one. And the other big emotional crux of the story is the Empress and her sons. And that didn't work for me, because it's supposed to be that each of the 3 terrors is like 3 different ways that the emperor screwed up their children, right? So the first terror is like, actually he's fine, but the second terror has classic middle kid syndrome of like, oh, everybody ignored me and I'm not great. I'm a middle child, so I understand this deeply. And then the third one is just kind of like, oh, I was neglected and treated as a monster, so now I act like a monster, which we're gonna have to talk about more. But the thing about it is that these people are just evil. Like, they're just super bad people.
But I wouldn't even say that. So, look, okay. What I wanted to say before was what I already said prior, so I just don't feel like it's necessitating repeating, but I feel like it also is. is that these are two books. There's two books being told in this, and everything you guys just said is wrong with it is what the first book should have maturized into being. But unfortunately, the author, I don't know what happened. It could have been a million different reasons why they decided to change the narration. They might have thought, oh, well, if I don't go jump into Kima and June's inner worlds, then nobody's going to care about them. So we're going to jump into first person and tell the story like it's a first person. And then a whole bunch of other stuff. But I wouldn't say, first and foremost, that they lack character depth in the beginning part. It's just more formally told in a classical way. And I think there's a lot of aspects to it that characterize them as, like, I wouldn't say necessarily I'm interested in their characters, but I don't think we were supposed to be interested in their characters. And if we were, then it's a failure, sure.
Yeah, you can't call it a love story. You can't open and close the book saying this is a love story.
Well, okay, again, but
without
who is
caring
that
about
for?
their characters.
But again, who is that for? Is that for the you character, or is that for you, the audience that's reading it?
It has to be for both.
His Lola could be discussing this with him, and there could be a whole... Now, this is not explored. This is not actualized in the novel, so it doesn't exist. But a more successful version of this story, if you wanted to play with that concept within the folds of the more important themes of what's going on, is that while the men of this world might not be able to admit that it is a love story, the women of this world, or at the very least his Lola, is able to admit that there is love within this story. But that's a completely different concept. And that is not the kind of love that is being showed in this, like, the last third of the book. The last third of the book is like a really well-written dime store novel romance. And the first, like, majority of it is written like a Norton's American short story anthology series story, where it is highly experimental. There are failures, but it is more highbrow in nature rather than the other, like, attempts at novelization, such as, let's say, ACOTAR or Fourth Wing, or any of these other ones where we're more emotionally in tune with our characters on an individual basis. So that way we can actually be like, oh, I hope they like there's two different, you can tell a story and care about the characters and want them to succeed without knowing their internal workings or even liking them all that much. But that's like a different attempt at storytelling. And I feel, again, like there are two different, like, there's a cleave in the middle. And anyway, but as far, there was something else I wanted to say. Right, the terrors. As a, like, side note, I think the terrors are, like, again, they're, well, Angry Otter said it before, and we've already said it multiple times in different ways, but there's just too many things going on in this. And unfortunately that you miss the good parts then. It's because there is a string of, like, really massively amazing envelope pushing, like, breaking the wall of what it means to be creative in this contemporary era and storytelling. And it doesn't successfully execute in the end. But the terrors are, like, just as a side note, not that that's something I really want to explore because it's not something I was particularly passionate or, like, thought was poorly done. But the first terror, just, like, all the problem is that the moon says it, but it's never actually, like, I mean, I guess you could say it's inherently infused in throughout the story, but the moon says, I realized the problem is just power is just an inexorable, like, mistress that beguiles everyone into being a dick. And I'm sorry, that's a lazy way of explaining how power affects people, in my opinion. And I think if the author were to explore that, which again is just yet another theme, which again, too many themes, but, like, if the author were to explore that, I think they could have used the asides of the characters in the theatrical way where it shows the suffering and pain of people, such as the very first one we get where the man is being framed for something he didn't do and is horribly murdered, to show, like, the difference between how that might culminate into the wish for power because you don't have any control over those who, for some reason, have been wronged and therefore use power to, like, heal some type of mental illness or like emotional wound. But the first terror is just like a regular dude who loves his sons and just has a lot of power. The second dude, like, again, there's more to it than just that, but he's like, it's hard to even go into any of these. It's because there's so much to each of the themes, but the author convolutes it by shoving it all down your throat.
So, I mean, and I should say that I did find the terrors to be vivid characters in a way that I didn't find Kima and June. Also, something about Kima and June, just very quickly, things that usually make us like a character: when they're downtrodden, when they have goals, when they're nice to people, when they have personal stakes in the story, when they're charismatic, and when they're cool. And so he has a few of those things. Like, again, he's downtrodden a little bit at the beginning, Kima is, and he's like nice to the orphans a little bit. But I would say June is missing almost all of those, and then Kima doesn't really show any of those again. Kima has no personal stakes in this story at all, so it's just weird.
Well, Kima randomly kills that dude later, the messenger, and that takes away from that kindness that he showed earlier. It's because June couldn't do it, and there's like some type of like message being said there of how like necessity requires that.
Kima's a mercenary. That's literally what he did prior to working at the gate. He killed people for a living. For me, what makes the terrors work as more complex than, because I wouldn't say they're vastly complex or super nuanced, but they're not mustache twirling villains.
No, they're not.
Is I mean, Lubu kind of is. But in a way where I think like it works for that particular
Lulu's also
character.
like got mommy issues, which makes it like pretend depth but like honestly the best scene of him is him eating his mom's fingers.
Again, I actually really like Lubu as a villain. I think he's very vivid. I just don't think there's a nuance there. There's like a little bit, but there's not like his villain monologue is a villain monologue. It's not an actual deep understanding of why he turned out the way he is, despite the book talking a lot about like you ending up a certain way because of your parents.
For me, Lubu is the least of the three, as far as I would say he's a straightforward villain, but in a way where I think a huge problem we've had with stories lately is trying to make the villains so nuanced and complex that they end up not functioning as villains. And so I actually liked Lubu's that, but in that case, this needed to be a different story. But the first terror I like because you have these three people, you have three sons isolated from their father. One is given more attention and learns his only value is as a son, but still doesn't get enough from his father. And so his way to create value for himself and to create a network of the relationship he doesn't have is to have sons. And he is because the thing is, I'm going to talk about how the character is presented and what we learned from him. The first terror is presented as just a dick initially. He just goes through, he fucks people up, just as likely to like murder a murderer or a thief as he is to like murder a child because it didn't bow when it should have. And he's presented as just this very one-note character. And then we begin to see he has a deep love for his sons. And Lindbergh made the point that Tara exploits his children and turns them to murderers, but still cares for them as his progeny, which she makes the point, I don't see how that's deep, it's just evil.
But he finds value in the murdering.
For me, what it was that it is the network of like love that he wanted, and he is giving and creating, because his sons deeply, and even June at the end, who like hates his father, still loves his father because the relationship they had was on a father-son basis a good relationship. And there's a moment where there's a couple of moments where I thought we got some nuance to the first terror. One, the conversation with his head and Kima, where he opened the jar and he was like, nah, I'm not pissed off. I'm like,
Best character for me is the first terror. He's my favorite character if I have a favorite character.
It was like, that was the second time I lost, and I deserved it both times. And so there's these moments of where like this terror is this terrible person who's done all of these things, and then there's these moments where he feels like just like a normal dad or dude who's like, yep, I got played twice.
Which makes the murdering feel worse. It's because if a man like that has empathy like that, that means he doesn't have empathy. So he's like a sociopath, which is very strange. It's very, again, there's very convoluted messages in the themes, both in the novel as well as within the characters themselves.
The other thing that did it for me was him choosing to forgive and not hate or kill June for choosing not him. There's a point where June is in a precarious position, and the first terror is like, I'll forgive you for betraying me and helping our mother, because we have the same mother, kill your grandfather, my father, and you can just come back and everything will be good. And June's like, nah, bro, I don't want to do that. And the first terror is like, okay, I'm not gonna, like, I'm just gonna let this be. And I don't know, I liked his relationship with his sons. I found it sweet.
And I also liked that he liked to bang Araya.
And that they had, like, they were two diametrically opposed forces, and yet they still smashed on occasion. Orion's one of the best characters. We're not going to talk about her at all.
There's nothing to say. It's fine. She's fine.
And then that moment at the end when he accepted his death and what needed to be done within his mother's quest, I thought was really great. I thought it made him not a one-note mustache-twirling villain. I don't think a one-note mustache-twirling villain would have been like, okay, to take this guy down, kill me, Mom. I got this. Or would have been respected his son's choice to not follow his path and to basically work against him. And I thought that made him, it's not an entire, like, super nuanced, but I don't think the first terror is mustache twirling, and I also don't think this third terror is mustache twirling.
No, I think the third terror is deeply offensive. The first terror, the thing about it is that all the stuff you said was really interesting, and you could maybe write a good fanfic about it. I don't mean that to be insulting. Like, just literally, like, you could interpret all of that into there, but I don't think any of that is shown on stage. We really don't get any exploration of his motivation. We don't really get any exploration of his relationships with his sons. None of them are named except for June. We don't get him getting...
But that's on purpose.
Yeah, but then it's not explored. Like, if he is a papa and, like, that's part of what makes him nuanced, then that's not a thing that's explored on stage.
See, I think what the problem is, though, is what you were saying before. This book is far too long, and I don't think that should be explored. I don't think it needs to be explored if what the story is about you.
We have the too many things problems.
And so his relationship, the idea that he is a slave to the idea of forming a new family from the one that he was neglected by or given only value to, really interesting. It's not really there that much. Again, he doesn't...
has 37 sons. That's a fuck ton.
I really liked that all the other sons didn't have names. I liked that they were a cohesive unit. Oh, like, because it made the scene, for me in particular, not that, because I don't give a fuck about his sons. Like, that's not what the story is about. So, like, they can all just be what, and especially on, like, on a stage. On a stage, their presence then becomes a unified force of the first Terror's sons. So it's more like all together they're a cohesive character.
I think that would be interesting if we ever got a sense that the sons felt neglected because of that, or dehumanized, or depersonalized, or we saw more of the interaction of them fighting among each other for their father's love and the dysfunction that could have. None of that's really there. He dies at one point and they're just like, oh no, we have to go find his head. Another place that he just, like, none of that depth is there is that, like, okay, so June and him never, and again, because June has, I don't know if we mentioned this, June has decided, I'm not going to kill anymore. All the horrible things I did for my father, I'm not going to do that anymore. So he's had a change of heart. He's betrayed his father. And release the Empress. We never get a substantial conversation between him and his father, ever. And his father is
wish that would
a head in a rice bucket for like a good 3 or 4 chapters, and they don't talk. He's just like, I'm just gonna carry my dead.
I was waiting for that the whole time.
And Kima and him have a very, like,
I know,
fantastic conversation that gives nuance to the so I do agree with that. I think June and the First Terror needed to have more going on.
All that nuance for the character, he's sort of affable, but he's just kind of affable and then also murders people, and none of that is explored in the novel. Again, this is like 17 hours. It's not a question of time. It's that it's not there.
So that's where my problem would come in with it. Is that for all those 17 goddamn hours, that's never explored. Yeah, I could see why you'd have a problem with that. The problem is with me is I would like to pretend in another world this book isn't that long, and also everything that came after the Moon Goddess's narration, it should have ended with her.
I mean, I think this is if this is like a 5-hour book or even like a 7-hour book, I'd be much more like
8 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Solid
thinking.
night of
Sorry,
sleep.
I'm thinking of it in double time because that's how I listen to it.
Oh, I'm
So
talking-
it's like half as long as whatever. I mean, that's the thing is I spent 8 hours listening to this. I don't understand people who spent 17. Like that's insanity. And so like that's the thing is like again like the other themes like the whole dancing or Filipino culture. It's like cool, but that's not.
I see where your ire's coming from now, Will. It's because I think at the core of the problem for, like, not that I'm trying to speak for you, but my interpretation of what you're saying, if I were to step into your shoes and experience it as you did, I would say,
You would immediately be like, "Oh, my lower back hurts from having to carry around this dick." Oh,
oh my god.
think about
that's
it.
not. Do lower backs hurt from carrying?
I don't
around
know
dicks?
actually. Go ahead.
You wouldn't. You don't know.
I mean,
No, I
I'm
do
sure
know, Katie. JK.
But no.
you'll have
no,
to edit that out, William. God forbid anyone knows your secret.
You know what's really you know what's really funny is I actually think you and I have the same problem with the book. I just think it's a different problem and you're interpreting it as an other problem, but I think really at the core of it, like it's not focused enough. I think what it has within it is doing something magical and wonderful, but it's kind of like my husband's cooking. I'd really love the steak he makes for me, and I'd really love the rice he makes for me, and I'd think his meals are fucking goddamn delicious, and I'm very lucky he doesn't listen to any of our podcasts. But there's so much goddamn fucking spices in it, I can't taste the fucking meat. And so, like, that's kind of like, that's not how I initially
It might be a
interpreted-
really good cut of steak.
but I can't taste it. All I taste is the goddamn whatever the fuck mojo pork shit he put on it. And so, like,
Moho.
Mojo. White girl moment.
Dating a Hispanic guy.
I actually think I understand what you're talking about. Because I think also it's the thing where people value different aspects of a book and their subjective experience differently. So like if Maria said, if you find the theater aspect pleasant, which I find so hard to believe anyone did, but if you do, I don't understand how you thought any of this was dancing. I'm sorry. I love you deeply, but like...
there is! But that's
Again,
another
I-
argument for another
I think
time.
part of this, like I said, I said this earlier, I think I brought to it stuff. And I'm
okay. All right.
well,
That's fair. Okay, yeah, I missed that part.
with the dancing in the like fight scenes and stuff, you asked what I got out of the theater, and I was just saying that by knowing the setup, by knowing it was this dancing thing, I brought that to the other
Gotcha,
stuff.
okay.
And that's why I made the point that we needed more of those scenes you talked about where we see the stage, because I think that would have brought it to other people.
Or even more in the prose about what the dance is, like, oh, he did a half step, or, you know, they did the shaka, whatever.
You know the scene towards the beginning? And I thought there, you know, now that I'm like kind of like not having as much of a headache now and I can see clearly through the mist of anger.
I can see the rain.
You know the scene on the stage earlier on when it's like oh god, I don't want to forget this thought, so I'm going to say it immediately after, even though it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, so that way we can bring it up later, just in case you don't. But anyway, you know the scene where it describes the bodies on the stage, how like their arms are wrapped around each other, and it's supposed to be the vines on the mountains and stuff. I thought there was gonna be more of that. And by inserting more of that, it would have connected to it. But also, can I just like bring up what, like, if there's a dream theater, like this is something that got me in the end. We are in the reflective world of the water, the ocean, the sea, the whatever, right?
The inverted theater.
Yeah. And so this is the place where the moon and the sea tangoed, and like this is the space, the liminal space of like being able to touch things that you otherwise cannot touch. And I get how that's like kind of like it kind of gets incorporated into the part where the you like comes up on stage and is like, yeah, I'm Araya's like descendant, and it touches the untouchable, the time, the years in between, the fantastical versus the rooted in reality. So that all is fine, but what does that have to do with any of the other themes? Like, I don't understand what this theater has to do with anything. Like, you know what I mean?
So I didn't understand it either, but I think if we go back to your and Maria's ideas about this being a connection of culture, then this is a way of showing.
So it's lost. It's lost in the many things.
I mean, again, I wouldn't even have thought it was a thing. Yeah, like it's a way of it's a device to connect the you and the story, his culture, their culture. Going back to what Katie was saying, I think actually, again, I think this is a thing where we're weighing different options. So I found this to be a very unpleasant reading experience. Even again, the prose veer between very nice and just complete bullshit. And I think this is also something where, I too felt like the Empress's viewpoint was like, that was the strongest part of the book.
It was the best part of the whole fucking book.
Yeah, no, like if the book had ended there, I'd be like, okay, this Kima and June thing, like they were a plot device to get her here and deliver her story, and then, her getting eaten. And like, no, I think I agree. I think I just also like, I want, it's not enough for me for a story to bring up an idea. It needs to do something with the idea. Yeah. And like this book just doesn't do a lot with those ideas. And the thing is, again, the book is very blunt in other ways. Like, again, characters will just tell you what they're thinking in their life stories, like directly. And so it feels weird that like this is where he decided to be subtle.
I would agree that I think it coalesces a little bit stronger with the monologue-esque feel of the Moon, but connecting back to like the theater as a connective place, I think it would have worked better and really hit that idea of cultural connectivity better if it was confirmed. The part during intermission where the U goes out and then there's that other
and nothing ever fucking comes of any of that.
The shade's like, hey, what's that you got there? I was like, that's his/her Lola. Like, having a moment of that.
Yes.
And I think that would have been really fantastic in the connection of, there's a point at which the people from the U's life come into the storytelling in the last third. And I think it would have been really fantastic, especially because we see versions of them that I took to be the version that saw the inverted theater, that were there.
Wait, what do you mean?
So we see child Lola. We see her Granjo or their Granjo as but like when he was still young and like kind of the silver fox vibe.
That's what I thought was gonna happen more quickly in this story.
The thing is, I think it would have worked if we knew that those shades, or if like the shades literally got up out of this thing, walked up on the stage, and then coalesced.
Yeah,
because they do tell Lola, Granjo, and Papa of the U tell part of the story, and I think it would have been better to make that really explicit that they have been in the audience with the U watching this. They're connecting over time, because by the time, a huge thing that we learned about the U in the story is that their Lola told them the stories of this, but their Lola's versions. And I think it would have worked really well for there to be an explicit moment of realizing, oh, I am connected, because their Lola dies before this point. Their Lola has been dead for years by the time this happens. And I think a moment of looking upon their Lola at the age which because we see the Lola kind of childlike. I imagined like a 10 or 11-year-old.
Well, also, like, she's such a fucking wretched old hag in her elder years. It might have actually brought like some type of warmth and happiness to her presence.
But also, it would have given, because the vibe I got, and again, this needed to be explicit, and there's so many things needed to be shaved away for this to stand out, because I think this could have been fantastic. What if this moment of meeting upon the stage of the inverted theater is why the Lola told this grandchild all the stories and not the others, that they are connected on this cosmic level in this moment of the inverted theater.
And she chose him. And like, it would have been really interesting also, by the way, as a side note, you know how the Empress at one point thinks to herself, like, what if it had been an Empress on the throne? How nice would it have been? Like, not that I necessarily need this theme in this book, but like, if we had like brought that to the forefront a little bit more, the U is a female, And then, like, unfortunately, then it wouldn't have been for the author himself, probably. But if the you is female, that's why the stories are brought down. And, like, it all comes together as far as, like, that gender of, like, the moon and, like, the you know, like, there could be something going on with that, too. But, you know, that's a different thing.
And I think it's kind of smart to leave the you as genderless. The book
yes.
at no point ever confirms. We never get a thought about that. Part of the story is just told from these three characters talking to you on top of the moonlit body, who also narrates the story. And it just would have been so cool to have Shades walk up onto stage and turn into the people from this you's life and have them actively narrate to them. Like, this is our, like, shared lineage, and we've already seen the inverted theater. As you are watching this, we have already done this. We've done this day before. And it's just such a cool concept, and it just doesn't get hammered home. And I think that streamlining the tale itself and giving this more room to breathe, I think would have hit more of what the author actually wanted
from it. By the way, can I just say I hated the modern language being randomly thrown in on the like
what was
like
that?
so yeah okay so but it also ruins itself though. It's because so we have like I mean I'm just throwing out random instances, but we have like there's very few instances of cursing like fuck like in the first half of the novel, except for the like lisp child who's like, you like rolling in shit, Peggy, and I'm like, oh, that's like really weirdly like doesn't sound like it belongs. It really felt like an sore spot in the beginning because I felt like it didn't match at all the tone of the novel of like going into this mystical place with these things. It's because so far none of that language has been utilized, which I guess you could say, oh, but it's like, you know, it's an orphan and it's rough language and stuff, and so that's fine and all. But then later on they also start saying fucking shit a lot more when it gets into first person, and then randomly when they're on the stage they're like, and suddenly he started mixing in with modern language. I'm like, wait, what do you mean suddenly? They already said fucking shit 5 seconds ago when they were back in like their normal mortal realm.
Yeah, that was weird. And I think they either say all right or okay at one point. And I was like, no.
That threw me so hard. Like when that language stuff happened, because it was like I was saying before, the first like bit of it that was my preference besides the Empress's Tale was like, and I really think it's a very brave choice. I don't know if Will would use the word brave, but I think it's a very brave and a very like, I don't think it's unsuccessful. I think these other things make it unsuccessful, but I think the choice itself is not unsuccessful in mixing first, second, and third person. And I think it's a really fun way of trying to tell a story, and I think it could have been successful had it been tighter.
I think if there'd been less of the interjections, it probably would have worked. But I also think that to make the theater conceit work better, I think you could have, without the changing from first to second to third, you could have still had the theater conceit. I don't necessarily think those two things are tied. And I think the theater conceit for me is more useful and like gave me
but
more.
I don't think that
than
means you have to cut the other.
No. You don't have to. But I think that just to go towards Will's argument, you could have made a stronger argument for the theater conceit if that hadn't also, because again, from the point of view of someone who's going to struggle with this, having a theater conceit and these constantly, like, you're just setting yourself up where there's going to be a huge like it's this author out the gate set readers up to go, what the fuck? Like, what are you doing? And unfortunately, either, like, and again, I told this to Will when I first told him that I think I'm weird, because at no point was I confused with the back and forth between the different things.
But I think it's your upbringing as well with the theater, because I had no issue with it either, other than the fact that listening to it at 2 times speed was really overwhelming. How nice would it have been as if one of the other things that he cleaned up in this novel was that the death of the Lola was the same as the death of the moon, and it all coalesced in the same moment.
Just going to make an argument, because
really?
the huge problem, because this was going to be another tangent I went on, is that the moon's initial problem is that the moon does not want to die, because there's this idea that as an immortal being, as a god, you are not actually immortal. Eventually you die, and then from your corpse comes forth the new incarnation of the thing, because it's similar to the concept, I forgot what book it was, but there was something that we either read or I've watched where the idea was that the concept of spring and the renewing of life is going to happen whether there is a god of spring, and that all that will happen is that a new god is going to replace this thing. And in here, it's if the moon dies, there will always be a moon in the sky, so another moon will replace it. It will be a new moon god. And the problem for our moon is that she looks down upon, or I'm going to say they, because at this point when they're a moon, it's just they, looks down upon, and they see they have a romance with the water. The water and the moon are into each other, but also the water keeps teaching these human people how to dance, and the moon's like, God damn it, I love the dancing, and it's like, I want to go, and eventually gets to the point where they go, if I die and a new moon takes my place, then they're going to worship and dance for some other motherfucker's light. And in this moment, the moon is failing to let go and let a new story come to pass.
Which I feel is such a poignant tale for anyone.
And it should have been deeply connected to why the fuck her lineage is so fucked up. You have to move on at some point. That's the whole point. And when Lola
never gets connected. She's like, oh, I think it has something to do with power, but I don't know.
No, it's the whole point of you gotta move. And I like it. And the other reason why I like this is because it's like being on stage when your part has ended and you need to get the fuck off. There's so many ways in which the theater conceit could have been elevated to a point where I think Will would have enjoyed it if these little moments had happened.
No, because that's such a good point, because you're hearing the swell of the crowd and you're like, I don't want to leave yet. I still want to be in this story.
And unfortunately, you have to leave in your moment. Otherwise, it's just going to turn into a tragedy, and a comic tragedy where you're the person, like, and that's what happens.
Well, you fuck up the reality of the play.
100%. And that's exactly what the moon does. She asks
that's such
a
a good
warrior.
point.
I know. She asks a warrior to cut her out of, she asks anyone, please, anyone cut me out of the heavens, because she realizes if I go down to Earth and I never die, nobody can, no one's replacing me.
Which is such a selfish concept, because when she goes away, everybody's in danger. So that connected with his Lola, if like the Lola was actually explored as a character a little bit more, what a wonderful way to bring the ancient culture back into the present day. And then you could also connect that with the character, if the character himself, I don't know how that would work age-wise with the character and everything.
I think enough was done with the Lola that like there is such a pathos to an old parent who you love, or an old caretaker who you love dying, that I think just setting those two up there has enough pathos. That's a human enough experience.
Pathos. And because to continue, for those who have not read this book, because I'm sure a lot of this means nothing to you, she comes down, she gets taken out, and she's like, perfect, this is my plan. And the warrior who cut her out of the sky by inventing a really long blade, she falls out, and she's like, warrior man, because she immediately starts dancing with people, because she's like, now I can dance with them. She learns how to dance. She's like, warrior man, what do you want? And he's like, I want sons. And at first she's like, yeah, like, I'm not thinking too hard about it. Sure. And she creates a dynasty of fucking terrible people who all refuse to do the exact thing she did, which is step aside when you are no longer adding and you were just taking.
And that could have played into each of the, although it doesn't really even talk about it all that much, is how each emperor could kill the previous emperor because the previous one's unwilling to go and the new one wants to take the place. And so there's this imbalance of inheritance.
And the idea that she's in this cycle of all of these emperors who are terrible being her progeny, and how she has two good sons, and then there's a third son that dies terribly and she brings back to life because, again, she cannot let things go. It, like, at the heart of this story is this really fantastic how this goddess who can't let things go actively works, and the story never goes, yeah, she's kind of to blame for this. It's insane to me that this isn't explicitly pointed out, or as she dies, she goes, this one's on me, guys.
I would have loved to see a a confrontation between her and Lola when they're both dying, and the
Oh.
Lola being like, no, you have to go, like, and that's how she comes to that realization of everything, and that she needs to end now, and or this will get worse.
For the Lola to say, you're not going to disappear, your stories are going to be told. I have been telling them, but you have to know the point where you let go and you let the new storyteller take your place. And in this moment, the Lola is like, okay, it's on you, grandchild. I picked to know all of my stories.
It really pissed me off that when he gets confronted, he's like, yeah, I don't really know any of the stories. Like, they're just kind of gimmicks. Like, I'm like, no, they're not.
But him learning that lesson should have been the
Yes.
arc of the book. That these aren't stories; these are a cultural heritage. Whether they are myths that you know and they add color to your culture, or you believe in them, they are a heritage. It's crazy. And Will, you're completely right. Because I the entire time was like, these two events should have been put together, but to have them actually have a conversation where Lola talks the moon through, it's time to let go, man.
I love the contrast of the old mortal woman and the beautiful god. Well, she's old, but the goddess and the old woman giving her the mortal advice of like, you got to end. We don't want to go. Nobody wants to go, but you're going to have to. And it could have been like a cool moment where like the you character like wheels her on stage or something like that for that conversation.
Oh, in her rickety old, like, yeah, that would have been fucking cool.
Similarly, imagine if there was a recollection early in the book of Lola dying, and then all of a sudden Lola is having a conversation that the you doesn't understand, and then during the inverted theater, you see the moon having the reverse conversation.
Uh-huh.
And again, just like, again, the entire point of this book is the idea of getting in touch with your cultural heritage and this coming together of all of however this diaspora, wherever these people are in time or on the globe, coming together to experience this moment, and how beautifully that would have happened, having those kinds of moments. Like, it's just, there's so much here.
It could have been so beautiful because it could have been on stage. They don't know who the Empress is talking to. She's just talking to a thing. And then the you is remembering the other half of the conversations.
And we're getting the conversation.
See,
like,
now that's a nice usage of abnormal
Yeah,
storytelling.
and
Yep.
June and Kima are like, who are you talking to the Empress? And so
Oh
it's
my God!
connecting the three planes of existence.
Yep, and that works so beautifully, and it also gives, like, having that kind of connection and seeing how the story is kind of connecting through this character, through their Lola, through to Kima and June, and
How
then having
everything is all of the one, type of thing.
and that way, when Kima and June finally come to the inverted theater and walk up on the stage, our main character is like, oh no, this is my story. This is my story, and walks up on stage not going, why me, but going,
Yes,
like,
this is me. This is my turn.
this is like the part I play. I'm holding the spear,
And I
like,
would have liked more emphasis on maybe like his the used body posture, or like, where he becomes part of the actors, part of the troupe.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. And or like they give him like a mantle as he goes on stage as like a costume.
Yes, or like a mask. It's because masks are a huge thing here.
Yeah, and so the thing is like because what happens is at one point June and Kima, after they eat their mom, go on to the stage, and they all went like, hey, and the stage went like, look, there's a big wave coming, you're gonna have to sacrifice yourself for it. And Kima's like, I don't want to die. Again, Kima's not enough of a character that I felt like this was a good like, the problem is this is the crux, this is the big decision he makes, and I didn't feel like it was backed up by his character up
I
until
agree.
this point. And so he asks the you, like, do you want to live even with all the shitty stuff that's happened? And the you says yes, but like that also doesn't feel like a climactic moment
No,
for you.
it doesn't at
just
all.
and it also is weirdly passive. This is Kima's choice to make, whereas I think it would have been cool if, like, yeah, the you stepped on with purpose and he's like, no, this is, I
Yes.
want to live, take this spear.
Yeah.
Or how chilling would it have been if all of the audience shade just stared at him and he realizes, oh,
The pressure-
this is me. It's gonna be his like, now whether or not this stays the same in our little mini rewrite version of things, who knows? But the point is all the shades staring at him, and that's why he has the spear. It's because it is like he is the turnkey. None of them will live. None of them will experience life or go through any of the things that they went through if he doesn't make the decision to live in this moment.
That would bring so much purpose to the entire theater experience and conceit and like tie together the themes you guys were talking about.
Especially if the you had some like thoughts of like not being happy with life and sometimes wishing he hadn't been born, and like not necessarily going the life ending ideation, but just not living, like not actually living. It's kind of, if you've ever seen the movie Soul, like being alive versus actually living, and having that be the thing, like no, I need to take advantage. I think you're right, Will. Like, and again, bringing these kinds of moments that connect to the punch of what the story is actually trying to do to the theater would have given so much more weight. And I think it could have won over someone like you who looked at it and went, that's a dumb, pretentious concept. But if you do it the right way, it can work. It can really hammer it home.
That pays dividends. That pays dividends. And it's like, I don't know that 17 hours of a book would have been worth hiking through to get there, but in a shorter book, I definitely think that's a good idea. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think that's and I think that's a good example of how the book doesn't work. Like the things about the book that don't work are because that never quite happens.
It doesn't coalesce in the way that it should. Knowing what I knew about the author, just knowing that he was, and having the entire context of reading, having an entire course of Asian American writers struggling to connect with their identities and their cultural past, I was bringing a lot of this meaning and connection that I think the author wanted to do, but just failed to do well.
And then started shipping his characters too much.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, everything like from the first person narrative of Kima and June felt very much like a completely different novel. Like it didn't feel like it fit in with the themes that were being explored prior. It's because now it's like being given a brand new reason to want to have to care about the things going on behind those two characters, I guess.
Completely. I was like, and the thing is, you're right that it's like it's split. That's two different books. This is the Empress's book and the Three Terrors, and then this is June and Kima touching their butts, and the other person also feeling that they're touching them, and then
it's just
the
weirdly
fact that when
horny
you touch
out of
someone,
nowhere. Like the nipple play stuff, like out of nowhere. I was just like, why did this suddenly become one of my Frost Iron fanfics? Like out of nowhere.
And it's wild because I think it would have been so much more affecting to just not have that kind, like to just be like, and then they realized if they touched each other they could and then just cut to the next scene, just cut.
The problem is like everything prior to this was very like not consistently, but it was very artistically like vague or like, you know, nuance. Like it wasn't like, and then they touched each other's dicks and rubbed their balls. Like, not that happened then. But, like, what my point is like, yeah, they started, like, teasing each other with nipple play. And I'm just like, why is this happening?
It's so weird.
There was a point earlier, and I was like, good on you, book. This is exactly how you handle this. Where Kima was like, you know, June liked him. And if he thought too much about it, he'd get excited. But this wasn't the moment. They had a job to do. There was something bigger than themselves. So they were just going to leave it. They were just going to leave it and see where it went. And I was like, perfect. And then you end the book with them going, well, let's see where this goes, you know?
Yes.
And that's not what happened.
How would you work in feet then, Maria? How would you work in a foot job in that case?
That happened is wild. I can't. Really quick, I want to talk, because we're sitting here at almost 2 hours, and I want to talk about something that I think we all enjoyed, that I think is one of the good things in this book, but that, given the way we've kind of been talking about recontextualizing, it could have been done better. The tortoises.
That's going to lead into my point about disability, but go ahead.
The tortoises in this story are wild. At first, you're like, are these, like, tortoise telephones? The answer is yes. They're also, like, a tortoise spy network. Basically, in the myth of the moon, and we hear about it from the Yu's Lola. We also hear about it from the moon herself. When the moon falls from the sky, she's gonna, like, destroy everything. Like, she's a meteor hurtling down upon the earth. And she's caught on the back of a giant fucking tortoise. And the impact is so significant, it creates, like, a giant bowl of valley with all of these rivers.
Which is such a beautiful concept. But
it is. It's great. Again, it's one of those moments where I was like, wow, I really like this artistic idea. And unfortunately, how it connects to stuff.
Foot jobs.
When she lands, the moon's like, thanks for catching me, bro. real solid move. What can I do for you? And the tortoise is like, I really miss my children. I'd like to be connected to them, and I want them to have connection to each other. And this, I think, connects to the idea of not being able to let go, of being so, wanting to hold on to your family and your progeny so hard that you create, because eventually it becomes a curse where the moon grants the wish, so the turtle mama, the tortoise mama, and all the other tortoises that ever are birthed are connected to each other in a network. They're almost of one mind, and they talk to each other as this one, as in any context, there is always multiple, and they are always connected.
Also, they're like driven insane by this level of knowledge, and they're like always like, it just seems like they're miserable.
Yeah, because with each generation, they know when they are born everything that came before them. It's kind of like what happens to Aaliyah in Dune, where like
Saint
you
Aaliyah
come
of
out.
the knife.
Yes, you come out as a baby, but you've got all the knowledge of a bajillion old women that came before you. You know, it's a lot, and that's what happens to the tortoises. And they're used by the royal family as a security system, so they can share messages back. It's also how like the emperor transmits messages. It's radio, but not. And there's this really like nicely kind of built up to moment where there is a tortoise, and I know where Will is going to go with this, so I'm just going to describe him here, but Will's going to talk about it. There's a tortoise who's called the Defect, who was born. I also have to talk about the fact that they took the womb out of the mother tortoise, and they have it in the castle,
Like, how
the
fucked
capital,
is that?
and they've just been making tortoises all by self. But the mother tortoise has been captured to isolate her, because she's kind of a god to the other tortoises in this like prison ship. And the Defect is a tortoise that was born that had stumpy legs that it can't walk properly. Its back is cracked and oozing pus, and we're never told, was this by abuse?
Like, surely it was not, it was not born with a cracked back, with pus constantly
With an infection. And basically it was born wrong and cannot connect to the system as well as its other siblings can do. And so it's kind of been left to just like rot away for the most part. And it's currently being taken to a gate.
Rabbit gate.
The Rabbit Gate, which is... Yeah, they have all of these gates that they use to get people through, and they use the tortoises as security measures. The Defect wants freedom. It's done. It doesn't want to go to this tower and just live in a tower attempting to do stuff. It just wants to kind of go be a happy... But then we get whisked off and we meet the goddess, the turtle goddess, and except it's dead. The second son, who we haven't talked about, the second terror a lot, has eaten the turtle goddess alive, and now is connected to the system. And again, we have someone who wants more than they should and goes above. Like, there's so many ways where you can play with not being willing to let go, not being willing to just like sit in your lane, wanting more than is provided,
Not wanting to end, yeah.
not wanting to end. And this guy eats the turtle goddess slowly to gain access to the system to try thwart his brothers. And the moment where you see the cleaved body of the rotting tortoise goddess and her face in a like scream was just and then being like him being like, it took a long time. I kept her drugged so I could keep her alive. And you're just like...
So that way her flesh didn't rot. Because it took so long to eat her.
It's a crazy scene. And the problem is, the tortoise is this, like, sympathetic character that we're given. And for a lot of people, and I know, like, even people who didn't like this book, we liked the tortoise.
The tortoise was a chill dude.
And then the tortoise gets killed in this scene. And it is absolutely not the place where this tortoise should have died.
Should have died.
At all. This is not the moment.
No one grieves him. No one grieves him.
Well, that's not necessarily true. Somebody does. Somebody like strokes his face and like loves on him. It's either Kima or June. It's Kima or June. One of the two.
And there's even a point where one of them thinks about it, but it's not like
no.
You as the reader cared so much about this that the fact that nobody else matches your energy on screen is crazy.
It's very abrupt too. It definitely feels like and I was gonna say this earlier, where you know how like all the scenes with Lola and everything, like it's quite poignant in the beginning, and then slowly but surely it just becomes non-existent, even though it seemed like a very key detail in the first half of the book. It almost felt like the author, no offense to the author, but it felt like the author got lazy and was just like, this is too much work. And that's how it felt like with the tortoise. It was like, I don't know how to incorporate him. Let's just kill him.
And again, easy way to incorporate it. The idea of that you don't need to be mentally constantly connected to the people around you, but you can be connected
To be
through
happy.
stories. Through the stories of them, that the tales you tell and the memories. And I also think you could have connected it with what the tortoise's final end is, which is in the moment right before it dies, the defect tortoise, I don't like calling it that, but that's what he's called in the book, sends a image out to all of its brethren of this moment where it was on a river, just cruising along the river, having a good time, and there was a bug, and there was sunshine, and like just a beautiful moment of peace and freedom, and getting to actually just be an animal, chilling and doing its business.
But also enjoying yourself and the nature around you rather than having to constantly cling to others.
And it sends this message out, and that message becomes immortalized in the other tortoises trying to get that same thing and trying to find their own freedom and realizing, I don't have to do this. And that becomes a tale that the other tortoises are going to share, though you kind of get the idea that they're all going to die out soon. But the idea of storytelling and sharing tales of what came before as a way to connect you is another great way. Because again, the tortoises are like, this is a fucking curse, bro. This isn't what we wanted. We wanted intimacy and being connected. We did not want this. And you can get intimacy and connection through storytelling. Like, it writes itself.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it's there.
It's one of those things where the author just doesn't connect different points in the thematically for some reason.
too close to the material.
I think he just wanted his like boys to be alone so they could like nipple play each other over telepathy distance.
Yeah.
This book has a weird thing about nipples. There's literally a scene that said the nipple recovering from the attack.
Also, what about the part where Lobo is like, play with your nipple?
That I thought was kind of funny, but like
I
was like,
but with all the other nipple play.
yeah, no, it's true.
Yes.
And also,
Lugo's
it was
crazy.
like, why is the person being turned on by it too? It would have been funnier if he was just like, man, I don't really care.
Yeah, like, I guess this is what I'm doing now.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention very quickly is that the disability rep in this book is not great. So there's 3 disabled people. Kima, we haven't mentioned it, but doesn't have an arm. He got it like chopped off at some point. It's not explained, which is annoying, but whatever.
It's actively told to us. We don't need to know.
Then there's the tortoise defect, and then there's also the third terror who like has like a mind of a child, I think is how they talk about it, has been like neglected all this time. Kima is, you would think, a good disability rep, but you actually forget that he doesn't have an arm. It never causes any problems. He never has any phantom pain.
How does he use a spear successfully?
Yeah.
A spear is a two-handed weapon.
I mean, not if you throw it, I guess.
But that's a javelin. That's not a spear. But he does
You
throw
would
it at
know.
one point.
I do not know.
But again, connecting that, because what Will's about to say is that he rarely ever feels like a character with a disability.
Handicap.
And the thing is, to imagine being a one-armed man given a two-handed weapon and being like, you need to carry this across the country.
Exhausting.
Not only exhausting, but this is your like this thing that you, and how does he like accommodate for that? How does he get through it? What are the ways in which he like learns how to use this thing in a way that feels natural to him? He like Kima is so solid in like his physicality that it doesn't even feel like a thing.
It's totally true. There's so many ways that in a like, and I'm not saying he needs to be like, woe is onto me, I can't do anything, but there's a lot of small things that would affect you, especially in like a pre-industrial setting, and none of them are ever brought up, and it's one of the ways his character feels very distant. It's because
Somebody in the comments on the YouTube video is going to say, but that's not the point of it. The point is that everybody else views him as a leper and useless, but he's actually not. And what would you say to that?
I think you can do that while still showing moments where he is impacted in a world that does not accommodate for him at all, that he is impacted by this thing. I do like the idea of him being like, because there's a point where he gets brought back from like death, and he's brought back without an arm, and he's like, yeah, no, that's me. And I like that. I like the idea of being like, I don't need that arm. That's not who I am. That I think is great. But I think you do need to have the moments where it is like shown how it can be something that impacts, and how like he deals with it, and how he just rolls with it, you know?
The social impact is told to us a lot, but because the character feels so distant, it feels very like an informed trait. You just don't feel it. You don't feel like, oh, I feel like a leper. It's just not there. Neglect is done better. Not neglect. Defect is done better because he's such a likable character. He just wants to be free, and then he gets fridged, and not even like fridged for emotional. He just dies.
Cushioned
Yeah,
by
he just
multiple
dies.
horrible.
It's so weird.
And like not even like it was like weirdly aggressive. Like how like because these ballistas shoot off these like intensely large like arrows, and they thunk into his tortoise shell, and then through his skull into to embed him
onto the ground.
Yeah, which is like weirdly mean. Like I don't know why, but that felt mean.
It's a side note in the scene. There's so much other stuff happening in the scene that his death. There's a moment later where either Kima or June, I can't remember which one, thinks back to it, and you get a little bit more of the impact of it. But it's so separated from the moment that it happens. Like at no point is somebody like. No. Because you, the reader, are like, and the problem is, a couple of people in our Discord mentioned that like they didn't realize that the tortoise had died in that scene. There's so much stuff happening.
Somebody may be like, okay, but what's the problem with that? It's a trope that disabled characters die for like and are just treated as corollaries to the more able-bodied characters in terms of he's just there. He's just fridged, essentially, but it's weird because none of the characters care, so it feels even more disrespectful than just being fridged. The third character is the Terror, right? And initially I was like, okay, because he's kind of animal coded, essentially. Initially, you're like, you don't really think he's a person. He's just kind of like a feral animal.
A creature.
But then at some point he starts becoming like a big human, and he starts talking, and it is a... There is an old stereotype of like the violent dimwit kind of character who's like a man baby but like violent, and this is playing into all of that imagery in a way that I found very gross.
Uncomfortable.
He wants Kima to love him. There's a part where he goes through destroying the city crying out for his mother, and it felt really odd. Like it's an oddly dated stereotype that felt uncomfortable, and I think the author was trying to make you feel uncomfortable, but I felt uncomfortable morally, not just like from a oh this is gross point of view.
The vibe I thought he was trying to go for, I don't think he landed, was the idea of like a feral child who, by virtue of being denied the
love and care,
like not just love and care, as humans we need connection and to talk to other humans, and we need to have things that engage our brains to develop properly. Like if a child is not taught how to talk and is not spoken to, at a certain point they lose the ability to engage in language effectively. And so I thought that was the vibe, that like despite not having language skills, there was still like unintelligence that was like behind there, or something, or that like the like nurse lady had like because there's a caretaker. Basically the third terror is a human except the head of a wolf, and everybody was so freaked out by him when he was born that they kind of just threw him into there's a city at the edge of the kingdom, it's called the Divine City, and it has a labyrinth under this thing, and they're like, okay, we'll just throw prisoners in there and you can kill them. Oh, third terror, you're the only one without a name. And there's a caretaker who like leads people down there and who loves the terror. And I think having her like read to him, talk to him, and actually like despite to a point, and have him have some form of intelligence and dreams and stuff on top of that, we could have played into the idea of the feral child who can't speak, but still there's a sense of intelligence. But unfortunately, it does not go that. We're just like,
I also feel like that should have just been he shouldn't have been the third terror. Like again, like there's just like so much going on that like I'm not really sure how this would work in like be in other ways. But if he was treated as just an animal, there would be something to be said for. It's almost like a break from the moon goddess's curse of always wanting to keep going on and like have a grasp on things. If by being an animal, like the tortoise, enjoying just being a tortoise, the third son was actually quite kind and like
Happy.
and just
Chill.
and found peace in being an animal that was not actually bound by the ties of familialhood and like the wish to be part of that something always constantly ongoing. And that could have been a nice antithesis to his two brothers, because at that point I felt like those other two brothers already did the job that the terrors should have done. Like at that point it kind of just felt like a redundancy.
Yeah, it felt like a weird last minute boss because we
Yeah.
already killed the two bosses earlier in the game.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't think it's handled well. The imagery is a little bit problematic.
I also want to highlight a fantastic thing that Lindbergh said. It would have made so much more sense for him to have connected with the prisoners instead of killing
Yeah.
them. How do you get a child that doesn't even have language to kill people? And the thing is, I connect this with this because when I listened to this in the gym earlier today, because it was earlier today, I had this exact thought. The emperor is like, I don't know what to do with this guy. I don't like him. I don't really want to see him. And then somebody hits the third and like hurts him, and he kills them then, like on accident, but he was provoked in a sense. And then the emperor goes, oh, perfect, he kills people, we'll just throw him in a dungeon, and then he'll just kill all of those people. And the idea is that like, oh yeah, because he killed that one guy that actively antagonized him, we're just perfect. He can, and
He's
like,
now just like Minotaur eating people, chasing them, cutting off their limbs.
It also doesn't really make sense to me personally that the emperor would feel that way about his son. Because, like, or not, like, well, the emperor himself was, like, kind of crazy and fucked up and was shitty to his son, so I guess maybe. But, like, that doesn't work in with the theme for me, as far as, like, that's, like, another theme on top of the theme behind that family. And it's, like, it becomes very messy, in my opinion.
Messy, I think, is a good word for it.
And I think it would have been so much more interesting if, as Lindbergh says, he connected to the prisoners, and that actually when you get to Joy Rock, you realize that this actually isn't this terrible prison. There is this animal caretaker, like kind of like the giant wolf in that one story you have, Will, where like, and this is his path.
Yeah, maybe
and
he
is-
actually even kind of protects them from the guards.
Yes.
The guards are always outside because they can't come in.
Exactly, and that he sees these outcasts as he is, and that there is this brotherhood that the caretaker understands and lets people think what they want to, and then when they come to kill him, they realize, oh God, we can't, this isn't a terror. This is, there's actually something beautiful here. And then in the fights that break out, the third terror actually, we also have to talk about the fact that it was the bird. I'd like to just remove the whole romance part with, or that he
that
falls in
also
love with.
felt
Why does that even
weirdly
happen?
gross.
Here's what I would have preferred to happen. I would have preferred if the terror did go out and see the world and do stuff, because there's a point where the caretaker releases the terror, releases this guy, and he shapeshifts and just lives as an animal and has a good time for a while. And then the idea is he's so called by the pull of his mother and the concept of his mother that he goes to the castle and he ends up getting captured, blah, blah, blah. I would have preferred if that's not what happened, that he literally came in, like, underneath the labyrinth was actually like a living space, and that he comes in rarely, and he just comes in like an animal form, a different animal form each time. Like sometimes he's the giant elk, sometimes he's the purple wolf, and he just comes in, sees them, makes sure everything is okay, and then fucks back off. And that as this war and this battle breaks out, he comes back to defend his people, and he ends up just dying of a circumstance of this war breaking out and trying to defend everyone.
Also, how nice of, like, I mean, again, this is like too much in this story when you consider the Lola and the moon goddess and all that other stuff going on. I just feel like it's just so much and too much, and I almost feel like the third tier shouldn't even exist. But like but how nice also would it have been? At least it would have worked in. I don't like it because I think it's too much, but that he goes off, he lives those things, and then he comes back and he's comforted by the stories that are told of their day and of their lives and of the people that he saved.
And he learns
so he becomes
language from them because he's still young enough when he's thrown in.
Yeah, so he becomes almost like a new god or something like that, or like, you know, like something like that where it's like a benevolence of nature, where he's like a nature god and it's like a nice reflection of the moon, but like one who actually accepts their role.
Well, it goes back to what Maria was saying in terms of like, instead of just like power corrupts, it could have been a theme of like, oh, he doesn't covet, and because he doesn't covet, he hasn't destroyed the land, and he could give up his life for the people that he likes. Yeah, no, it's a much better way.
Yeah, especially if the caretaker, like, genuinely showed him, like, love and affection, denied his brothers, and, like, they're sitting there in their high towers thinking terribly of him, and actually he's the best of the three. And I like the idea of him having a poetic ending that is not just big mad guy go smash. Like,
that's almost like a whole other story beyond the you and the Lola and everything else. Like, that's just so much more to chomp on.
And I also would have liked if the moon would have met him and he didn't recognize her as, like, he recognized her
Mother.
As an animal might recognize, like you have animals that leave
it's the moon.
their parents pretty quickly and recognize her in that sense, like, oh, you gave me life, but this is not this is not my choice.
He would have been the only one of the terrorists to have an actual mother, in a sense of, you know, we talked about this in Remains of Him, a very wonderful Coho book, but like, he actually had a mother who cared for him. Whereas that's the other thing, is that the family drama in the middle of the book doesn't quite work, because they keep talking about how the first two terrorists talk about how their mother neglected them, and I'm like, she's not a mother to you, though. Like, you never interacted with her before this. She's a figure.
Why are you guys so pissed off at her? Your father literally had her held up in we haven't mentioned this, and the moon was locked up.
I didn't think they were pissed off at her.
Lubu is, and then the first terror is like,
Lubu's not pissed off. He just like loves her so much he wants to eat her. Well, no, not really. That's not really what it is. But like, I didn't get the sense that Lubu was angry at all at her. It was that, like, wow, we finally. He's so excited. He's like, I wish I could have taken you to go see this beautiful farm with all these beautiful flowers and stuff.
Yeah, I suppose you're more correct about that.
But again, for me, I think the idea that, like, why do they think of her as their mother? Would not there have been, like, because again, she's not even like a royal mother where, like, you see her at breakfast and at dinner time, but then during the day you're with your governess and your nannies. It's not even that kind of relationship. She doesn't exist on a fundamental level to them, because she is held.
She's a myth.
She's held on a pedestal where she's in between water and a pile of moon rocks. I'm not going to explain the significance of that. Don't worry about it. But she's been kept there for years. Eventually, the emperors realized, oh God, she's too powerful. We got to lock her up. We got to lock her up, boys. So they just lock her up for ages. And the whole point of the story is she's fucking a scopade. This is her as a very, very old, wrinkly, like, body.
Crone.
Like, this is her, like, on her freedom era.
She's a mummified Buddhist, basically, type of vibe.
She's in her, like, freedom era. Like, that's not the vibe, but there could have been a version of this where it was like the old woman going for her last ride of life with
bucket list.
the two disgruntled, like, young, like, teenage boys that have to drag her across.
That want to give each other foot jobs.
Will's right. There's no reason for them to think of her, but I'm okay with the two that are in the palace, because they're told your mother is the moon, this goddess, and they're told that she exists, and they feel separated, and that there is, maybe they just don't have any other mother figure, so they put that identity of it into this creature that exists behind a door, versus our third terror, who could have looked at the caretaker as his mom and be like, you might have, like, on a fundamental, he might look and be like, yes, there is a connection.
You sired me.
Yes, sired
we are
me,
blood.
but you are not. And to look at that and go, oh, once again, what the royal family has also done is by not being willing to let go me as their mother figure, it is further corrupting them. And again, this whole thing about being able to let go, and then but being connected by stories and stuff, like, all of that could coalesce with that moment too. And then finally, for her, like, her dying closer to that point, and then realizing, oh, me being here is doing nothing for anyone. Like, this guy who's the least connected to me is doing great. It's time for me.
Themes.
Yes, themes, indeed. It's time for me to go. And then all she asks is, at some point, if you can tell him, like, and again, and this is a version where he's learned language enough to understand, especially if we go with the idea that the caretaker told the terror stories, and that's one of the ways he connected and learned. And then it just looks at the woman that was his mother on a fundamental level and says, tell him mine, you know? But then he ends up dying anyway. Like, great. Fucking great. End everything. It
He
works.
served his thematic purpose. I think we've talked about our issues with the book, and I think also those two examples are two examples of how the book could succeed in ways that I don't think it quite does. I think, again, if you start this book and vibe with it, I think you'll enjoy it. I'm not going to go through the bad prose, because there are bad prose, but like at this point it feels a little bit petty. Some of the prose are good, some of it makes no sense. Yeah, so
they were experimenting. Somebody maybe should have read it and been like, I can't understand what that means.
No, okay, I'll just share one, but like, because I had uploaded. Here it is.
What? I don't even remember.
Oh, okay, so this one...
his tone came out like a shadow from between your legs.
So what this one is you didn't pick this up, but it is talked about earlier. There are pipes for sound underneath the seats.
Oh, but why is it a shadow?
It's because the tone
shadow
is
isn't
maybe
the
like a
sound.
shadow.
No, the
Again, this
shadow,
is not a good
that
description.
part. So all I'm defending is the from underneath between her legs or their legs. That's the only thing I'm talking about, because that in some theaters did have that, where to have sound things that like it had these things. So that's the only part. The rest of that, I have nothing.
But the
for
shadow
you.
part, I'm assuming it means like something foreboding in some way.
I guess.
But
Here, that was not actually even the one I meant. Let me see if I can find the one I meant. Oh, the ape covered its face with its large hand and then peeled it away as if unmasking himself.
This is terrible. I hate this
it's
one.
so bad.
wait, why? I don't.
Because it sounds like he's tearing off his face.
Yeah, but doesn't that like basically mean he's showing his true feelings?
No. Physically tearing off his face. What he's talking about is that he took his hand off.
Wait,
What she's saying is, on a figurative level, he covered his face. Then when he lifts
covered his
it,
face with its large hand and then peeled away as if unmasking himself. Yeah, no, this is fine. This is actually not the worst one at all.
A lot of us, or at least I did, and a few other people were like, that's him like he's pulling off his actual skin of his face is how I
it says
read
as
that.
if.
The problem is, the way it's described is the peeling off is peeling off of his hand, but the way it's written is it implies peeling off his face. And I'm so ignoring the as if. Just bring it back up on screen for me, Will. I'm gonna talk through this. So the ape covered its face with its large hand and then peeled it away.
I see what you're saying.
That ignore the as if unmasking himself.
Yeah.
He places, and then,
I see what you're saying.
And so the it is still the hand, but unfortunately the way it reads is as if
it should have been
peeling
like
off his
2
face.
sentences or something.
What you're saying, Katie, is I think what they're actually trying to get at is that the ape covered his face and then by removing it
and peeled his hand away as if like.
But not that, just don't say peeled, but just to show a more genuine emotion. Like perhaps he was displaying something more true to the moment. Because I think that's what it is trying to say in that moment. But unfortunately, the way it's written, and that happens a lot where like the way something is written, you're like, I can see what you were trying to do.
Me and Katie at one point did a critique stream. We don't have time to go into it, but we do that for our $15 Parasocial Darling tier of these violent delights. And one of the things we noticed is that like her imagery on the surface sounds good, but when you try to picture it, it breaks down, or the metaphor doesn't continue well. And that's kind of the thing here is like you can kind of get his vibe, but there's a lack of clarity to it.
I do remember when I was listening to this that I remember when it did get to that part. It's funny it's because I don't think my like active brain was like, oh, this is an issue, but my hind brain, I do remember when hearing the peel part, I was like, oh, this imagery is a little off.
And that happens randomly, just where the way something is phrased.
Wait, will you go back to actually your other quote thing, the stomach one? Because that's the one that got me, actually.
Which felt like nothing less than the salted breeze of the sleeping sea blowing through their bellies.
Like, what does that mean?
And especially when you understand that sleeping sea is death. Go back. I'm going to break this down further for us. Okay, so something has happened, and these people, and what this is trying to say is they're super hungry and they haven't eaten in a while, okay? Which felt like nothing less than the salted breeze of the, and when you read Sleeping Sea, death blowing through their bellies.
As in, like, they're so hungry that it was as if they were dead and empty, and like, and it's the death of that. That does not connect.
It's so unclear. I'm going to flash on screen for people who want to stop another longer one that didn't make any sense. And then my favorite, the nipple recovering from the attack. When people talk about beautiful prose, that's what you guys are in. This is like Song of Achilles, where she had a reproachful butt.
There are moments where the prose isn't engaging in that, and it's just being much more straightforward, especially the narration around the Lola and the Yu's perspective is just very straightforward and clean, and I find that works so much better than when the author is trying to hit. It's like the author has an actually simpler style, but at moments tries too hard to reach a purple prose level, and it just comes out terribly. And when they're being more straightforward, it works so much better.
And he can do actually really nice descriptions at times. I didn't take notes because I mostly listened to this. These examples are courtesy of Lindbergh. But yeah, he's just trying too hard at times.
I am picturing tiny armies laying siege to his nipple. That is actually the image I also kind of funnily enough had, like these little like, anyway, you're right though, it's really funny. It's because there's so much of that purple well, I'm not gonna call it purple prose, but there's so much of that magical realism kind of vibe in the scenes with you, where it, like, I think honestly the most success this book had for me was an hour into the book, where there was like these mixed back and forth imagery of like the waking world of the Yu and like Lola and the cigarette and seeing the painting of the old world or of the old country, and then that like mixing in with his time, and which it actually confused me the most because he's in the theater, he's watching the play, so it's kind of confusing because it's like, why am I like?
I think you're totally right, and I think that's part of the problem is that the book already has a clarity problem, and then his prose on top of that add another clarity problem, and so there's just a lot of like nestled unclear things, and so it makes it hard to figure out what's going on. I know at one point one of the people in the book club was very confused by the first terror dying. They actually missed it because it immediately jumps into a description of like a flower opening, blooming, and then red, and like, so all of a sudden you're going from a concrete thing that happened to like a very abstract description of it, which in a normal book I think would be fine, but in this one you're like, okay, are we back with you? Is this somebody else talking off screen? What is going on? Yeah, so it's one of these things that like I think his editor needed to be like, calm down, guys.
I agree.
But okay, any final thoughts?
I think we did a great job. I think this was actually super productive. I think, like, great job, team, for coming from different perspectives on the book. I'm super proud.
The thing is that I think we all had the same problems with it, but we all had different levels of appreciation for what did work. But no, I think my favorite takeaway from this, though, is the concept. Again, I don't feel like the third tier should exist. I feel like it becomes so, like, that whole, like, expanse of that part of the book just feels like a weirdly long epilogue or something. I don't know, like it just didn't feel like it fit
I
with
agree.
what the cleanliness of the moon's death. And I think, like, anyway, back to what I was saying, my favorite takeaway from this is that I think Lola and the moon should have come together as a singular theme.
This book would have worked so much better if we would have connected
Yeah.
the Yu's life and characters in it, who I found very compelling, with those, and again, it would have heightened the idea that this is a story about stories.
Which is what I thought. Like, again, I don't see this as a story about love. I see it as a story about cultural heritage mixed with how can stories be important.
To go back to what he said about this one's for me, stories are written for yourself, but you have to make it so other people can read them too. If you publish, you know what I mean? Like, all of our stories we fundamentally write to ourselves. The only way to really motivate yourself to stick through writing a book is if you're writing something you want to read and you find that you're doing for yourself. But then when your betas get to it, you kind of got to change You got to change things around so that other people can actually
Enjoy.
engage with your story.
Well, it depends what you want out of your writing too. It's because what like the definition of a successfully written work, I think, is super subjective. It's the same thing. Like it's the difference between like a Banksy versus like I don't know a watercolor painting. You know what I mean? Like there's like a lot of people I've met are like, Banksy's not art. That's just like a political statement and it's shitty representation. And then I personally feel a lot of Banksy's art is like fucking amazing art.
Connecting to that, one of the things that makes Banksy and a lot of modern artists so actually art is the context of which they fall into within art history. They are speaking to the historiography of art in those moments. And so to take something that you look at and go, this is weird and wild, if it is in context with a larger thing that it is actively talking to, like
but then you have to ask who's the audience listening to it, you know, like, and do they have the context for that?
That's another thing is
exactly
like in those moments, that is art for artists. It's not art for casual viewers.
Yeah.
Part of it also is art is also actually just a kind of form of speculative currency, essentially, in terms of how people use it. But anyway, that would have actually been a fascinating idea, though, if in watching this play, it connected something his Lola had said to, like, it's the idea of art being in conversation, and he didn't have the full conversation, and now he does, and things Lola had told him now mean something more to him.
Yep, and it's mirrored by the literal conversation that he did not have half the context of when he had his Lola pass. No, I'm telling you, it writes itself. It's there.
God.
It's there.
Yeah, this actually did end up being quite productive. Okay, all right. We love you all, our parasocial darlings.
Bye!